thought I'd never leave. He used to laugh and say, "You're nothing without me," and maybe for a while, I believed him. But the truth is, that man didn't just lose his job, he lost everything, including me. Welcome to Raw Reddit Tales. Subscribe to keep getting the spiciest stories. For years, my husband made me feel small. He had this way of speaking that cut deeper than shouting ever could. It wasn't always about what he said. Sometimes it was the silence that followed. The long looks of disappointment, the smirk when I messed up dinner, the way he'd correct me in front of friends just to remind everyone who had the power. He never hit me, but his words left bruises no one could see. I used to think if I loved him harder, he'd change. So I tried. I cooked his favorite meals, I listened when he complained, I swallowed my pride until I almost forgot what it tasted like. But nothing was ever enough. He wanted me quiet, obedient, invisible. And for a long time, I was. He didn't realize that quiet women are dangerous. We remember everything, every insult, every moment we're made to feel worthless, every time our name is said like an inconvenience. And I remembered. Oh, I remembered. While he called me useless, I learned how to manage every dollar he made. He'd toss his bank cards at me carelessly, assuming I wouldn't understand how to use them. But I learned. I learned how to save, how to transfer, how to build something small and secret, something that would one day become my escape. The night he came home shouting about being the man of this house, I just stared at him and said nothing. Inside, I'd already left him. He just didn't know it yet. He thought his power came from his money and his job, but I knew the truth. The moment either of those disappeared, so would his control over me. And so I waited, patiently, quietly, because I knew one day the universe would hand me the perfect moment, the day he lost everything. The morning my husband lost his job, he strutted into the kitchen like nothing had changed. He poured himself coffee, bragged about his big plans, and went on about how the company would never survive without him. I smiled and nodded, hiding the satisfaction that threatened to escape. Years of being told I was nothing had taught me patience, and now, patience was my weapon. He didn't see the quiet storm brewing beneath his own roof. While he boasted, I counted every dollar I had quietly redirected over the years. Little by little, I had taken control of what he assumed was untouchable. He thought his salary and bank statements were invisible walls protecting him, but they were just the glass ceilings I had been quietly shattering. He walked around like a king in a palace he didn't realize was already crumbling. I handled the bills, the investments, the accounts he never checked, all while smiling when he called me incompetent. I memorized passwords, traced hidden accounts, and recorded his careless bragging. Each word, each careless boast became a thread in the net I was weaving. I remember the night he came home furious about a lost client. He slammed doors, threw papers across the room, and demanded explanations as if the world owed him obedience. I poured his drink, kept my expression calm, and listened to him unravel. Inside, I was quiet but calculating, like a surgeon mapping out a precise incision. Every outburst brought me closer to the moment I would finally step out of the shadows. He had no idea that I wasn't just surviving. I was building. Quietly, efficiently, like a woman who had spent years being underestimated. I spent nights studying contracts, reading up on investments, and keeping meticulous records. He thought he had stripped me of all power, but in truth, I had been stockpiling my own strength, hidden, silent, unstoppable. When he complained about my apathy, I only smiled. It was my favorite disguise. He had no clue that the woman he mocked, the one he thought was fragile, had been orchestrating a complete reversal of power. I had learned the hard way that patience and planning were far more dangerous than confrontation. By the time the first official notice of his termination arrived, I was ready. I didn't gloat. I didn't call attention to what I had done. I simply waited for the perfect moment to walk away, a day when he was at his weakest, stripped of pride and completely powerless. And in my heart, I smiled at the thought that he would never see it coming. The day my husband lost his job, the house felt smaller. He prowled from room to room, muttering about injustice and incompetence, blaming everyone but himself. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, pretending to be fragile, like the obedient, defeated wife he always thought I was. But inside, I was alive in a way he had never allowed me to be. Years of insults and belittling had sharpened my mind. His arrogance had blinded him to my quiet power. He called everyone he knew, demanding favors and explanations, his voice rising higher with each failed attempt. I listened, pretending to worry, but in reality I had been preparing for this moment for years. Every account, every small transfer, every financial secret I had quietly orchestrated was now my shield and my sword. He had no clue how thoroughly I had dismantled his supposed control. When he realized the truth, that the money he thought was untouchable was gone, the first cracks appeared. His disbelief quickly turned to anger. "How could you do this?" he shouted, pacing the living room like a caged animal. I stayed calm, letting him rage, because rage reveals weakness, and I had been studying his weaknesses for a lifetime. He accused me of betrayal, of being manipulative, of ruining him. I listened quietly, letting each word wash over me. I didn't defend myself. I didn't justify my actions. All I did was wait. Wait for the moment when his pride would crumble completely, because the truth was, he had been destroying himself for years. I had merely been patient. That evening, when he realized that every dollar, every resource he thought was his leverage over me, was gone, I packed my bag. I didn't leave a note. I didn't speak a word. I simply walked toward the door, suitcase in hand, leaving him in the chaos he had created. His calls, his pleading, his threats. They bounced off the walls and died in the empty spaces where my presence used to be. I stopped in the doorway for a moment and looked at him, the man who had spent years demeaning me, convinced that I was nothing without him. Now he was nothing with me gone. And in that moment, I finally understood the true power of patience and quiet planning. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me, and felt the first taste of freedom in years. For the first time, I wasn't surviving, I was thriving, and nothing he had left could ever touch me again. I didn't drive far that first morning. I parked a few streets away, sat in my car, and watched my husband stumble around the house, screaming my name like a man who had lost everything, but still didn't understand why. His panic, his disbelief, the raw panic in his voice, it was like watching a movie I had directed from the shadows for years. He thought his world had fallen apart because of me, but the truth was, it had always been his arrogance that would bring him down. I moved quietly, almost like a ghost, taking only what I needed. My suitcase held my new life: documents, bank cards, a ticket to start over somewhere no one knew my name. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting match. I had learned over time that subtlety is far more powerful than drama. Let him shout, let him beg, let him discover the emptiness he had built around himself. By the time the company announced the investigation into missing funds, I was already gone. My husband called incessantly, angry, pleading, sometimes threatening. I ignored him all. I didn't need to respond. He had already shown the world who he really was: careless, entitled, and unable to see that the person he demeaned quietly held all the power he had thought was his. I rented a small apartment above a flower shop in a part of the city where I could disappear. My mornings were quiet, filled with coffee and headlines. Each article about him, embezzlement, fraud, his frantic attempts to recover, was a reminder of the perfect timing of my departure. He had taught me every weakness, every pattern, every flaw, and I had used that knowledge not to hurt him violently, but to reclaim what was always mine: my dignity, my freedom, my life. Friends and family tried to reach me, warning me to be careful, asking if I had to make it so public. I smiled politely. Public? There was nothing public about survival. There was nothing dramatic about leaving a house that had trapped me in shame, insults, and fear. What mattered was that I was free. What mattered was that my husband, for the first time, understood the cost of arrogance and abuse. By the time the divorce papers were filed, he had nothing left but a hollow pride and reputation in shambles. I didn't gloat. I didn't call attention to the fact that the woman he had mocked and controlled had become untouchable. I simply built a life where his absence was no longer a loss, but a victory. Not just over him, but over the years he had tried to erase me. Life after him was quiet, but not empty. I filled my days with routines I had denied myself for years: coffee in the mornings, long walks through streets I didn't have to share, reading books without interruption, laughing freely at small things without worrying about judgment. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, teaching them how to manage money, protect themselves financially, and regain control over their lives. Every lesson I shared was personal, drawn from the years I had survived a man who measured love in humiliation and control. News about my husband occasionally floated through my life. Rumors that he was working odd jobs, that his friends had abandoned him, that he had become a cautionary tale in the circles he once dominated. I didn't feel joy at hearing it, only a quiet satisfaction, like watching a storm finally reach its natural end. It was not my revenge, not anymore. It was simply the truth catching up to him. He tried to contact me multiple times, each attempt more desperate than the last, through friends, through my family, even by email. I ignored it all. When he finally called me directly, his voice was thin and tired, stripped of the arrogance he had always relied on. He said he was sorry, that he had changed, that he needed me. I listened in silence, letting him speak, letting his words reveal that he still didn't truly understand the years of control, fear, and humiliation he had inflicted. "I've lost everything," he said, voice breaking. "Yes," I replied softly, "including me." And that was all. I hung up. No argument, no explanation. I had already moved on. In the months that followed, I built a new life. I found an apartment of my own, a job that valued me, friends who respected me, and for the first time in years, peace. I learned to trust myself again, to make decisions for me alone, and to measure my worth by my own standards, rather than his approval. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse of him in the news, frantic, struggling, isolated, and every time I would smile quietly because I knew the truth. He had spent years teaching me how to survive, and in the process he had also taught me how to thrive. I wasn't just the woman he had underestimated. I was the woman who had waited, planned, and finally claimed the life he tried to deny me. He may have lost his empire, his pride, and his illusions of control, but I had gained something far more valuable: myself. Months passed, and with each sunrise, the version of me that once trembled under his words faded further away. I wasn't the same woman who begged for scraps of affection or validation. I was the woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes, not to prove anything to him, but to finally breathe without fear. Every time I caught my reflection, I saw strength where there used to be survival. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need to scream to be heard. One morning, as I was leaving my apartment, I saw him, standing across the street, thinner, defeated, holding a crumpled envelope in his hand. His eyes found mine, desperate, almost childlike. For a moment, I felt the old ache, the instinct to comfort, to fix, to forgive, but that feeling disappeared as quickly as it came, because I realized he wasn't there for closure. He was there for rescue. He crossed the street, calling my name, voice trembling. "Please, just hear me out. I lost everything: the house, the cars, the savings. They took it all." His voice cracked. "I just need someone to believe in me again." I stood still, letting him speak. The same man who once told me I was nothing, now begging the woman he had broken to save him. There was a time when I would have given him everything, but that time was gone. "You didn't lose everything," I said quietly. "You threw it away, piece by piece, every time you opened your mouth to remind me I wasn't enough." His tears fell freely, but they didn't move me. I had cried enough for both of us long ago. I reached into my bag, took out a folded letter, and handed it to him. "These are the final papers. Sign them. Let this end properly." He looked down at the letter, confused, and back at me. "Please," he whispered, "we can fix this." I smiled softly. "You can't fix what you refuse to see was broken." And with that, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back, not once. Behind me stood a man who had built his power on my silence, only to drown in his own arrogance. Ahead of me was freedom, peace, and the quiet certainty that I had finally won, not by revenge, but by release. When I reached the end of the street, I looked up at the sky, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself, the day he lost everything was the day I found myself. The end. Please like and subscribe for more interesting stories like this. What do you think of this story? Please comment below.